I'm delighted that you're here, to be very honest with you, because I feel that the era of what my father did was very short, but very important in the beginning of the movies. They were Barney, AJ, Ida, John, Dave, Max, Harry, and Elmer. And originally, when they first came out, they were very dull. They ran 15 minutes, there was no sound, there was nothing on them, and the people sat on little canvas chairs, and most of the small theaters were storefronts, because the large theaters didn't feel that they wanted to spend the money to arrange the theaters for the movies, because they were convinced it wouldn't last, that they were just a fad. So people like my father knew that they were not a fad. His first theater, of course, was in 1908, and it was a storefront. There, you know, one of the favorite stories in the book that I love is when they bought a piece of land that had a building on it, and they wanted to put up their own theater, so they were told they could move the building. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
It's
I
wonderful.
Do, yeah.
And they said they were told they could move the building across the street into another piece of property, and they put it on rollers, and then they had to turn it around and back it in.
Right.
And they
I think it was the Central Park, I think.
was it the center? And they had to stop traffic.
We have.
I love that story. And they'd stop traffic to move this across the street. Can you just see everybody standing around watching this building being taken across the street?
Yeah.
Daddy really invented the movie palace. It was his vision that saw all that beauty and all that wonder. And he just went ahead, and he never bothered him that everybody copied him, because he was always thinking of something else after that. He was a very imaginative man and a very dear man. He always felt that he had to give more than just one thing to his customers, to his people that came in. He wanted to always lift their thought and their thinking. He used to say, when they come into my theater, they are prince and princess, all of them, no matter where they came from, no matter what they do. And they're all paying the same thing when they come in, so they are all the same prince and princess. And that was his whole theory. Amazing. At any rate, Sam and Jen came over to visit with us in '33, and Sam went with Daddy to see if they wanted to go into these theaters in Germany. And Mr. Hitler was making his acceptance speech, which they heard as they were walking from the hotel to this man's office. And my father said his blood ran cold as he listened to this man, and he looked at the people that were standing and listening to him. And when he got to the office, he said to him, "There's no way I'll go in business, and I would recommend that you sell all your theaters and get the hell out of here." And the man said, "Are you talking about the Nazi Party?" And my father said, "Yes." "Oh," he said, "little party, very insignificant. My secretary is a member of the party, and she tells me that the meetings are a joke." And my father said, "Well, you're a fool." He said, "I'm leaving today, and I will never step foot in this country as long as that man is still here." And he said, "I really recommend that you get out of here." And the man laughed at him. They walked back to the hotel, and my father used to take. We were walking back to the hotel, Sam and I, and Sam was very, very short. And he said, all of a sudden, coming towards us were 3 enormous SS men in their uniforms, and they were filling the sidewalk. And I said, "Come on, Sam, we're going to go down on the street and walk around them, because they ain't going to let us by." Sam said, "No, bring them on, I'll fight them." And my father said, "Not today, Sam." And they got down, they went back to the hotel, never stepped foot in Germany again. We lived in Switzerland, we lived in England, we lived in France, we lived in Italy, but never in Germany. He would never set foot there. In '38 and '39, we were there. And we had come back to Europe the summer of '38. Off we went to Samoritz. We didn't realize that at that point, the young Germans who were allowed out of Germany could not go farther than 1 hour from a friendly border. And St. Moritz was 1 hour from the Italian border. So the ski slopes were full of these very elegant-looking young men, beautiful young men, skiing, but they had no money. They weren't allowed to take any money out, so they would stay in these very inexpensive little pensions. But on the weekends, they would all come to the hotels for the tea dancing. You should pardon the expression, in their SS uniforms. Very scary. And in they would march in, you know, and then they would come up and invite you to dance, and you couldn't say no. It was too, you know, you just didn't say no. It was not. My father just hit the ceiling. It was really very, very awkward. And we knew then that, you know, things were not going to be any better. So we went from St. Moritz back to Geneva, and from Geneva we decided we would go to Paris, and that was the end of when we came back. So we moved back to New York. And at that point, Skouras approached my father, and this is where my connection with my father in the theater actually happened. When we moved back, Skouras called him, and he said, "The Roxy has been run at a loss for 10 years. I want you to take it over, Abe, because you're the only one that knows how to run a 5,000-seat. How you invented them." So my father went back into the Roxy. He'd been out of the business for 10 years. And within a couple of years, it was making money hand over fist. There was a movie, and then they had a line of girls called the Roxyettes that were the gay foster girls, and they were very, very good. And she was very imaginative. And Gay had worked for, there was a dance couple called Fanchon and Marco. They were brother and sister. And they worked at 20th, and Gay knew, they had all been together in vaudeville, so we knew all of them. But Gay had the Roxyettes. There was always a band, and often we had Lucille Ball. When she ran away to marry Desi Arnaz, she was playing at the Roxy. And they eloped to Connecticut, I think. And if there was a big star that needed to make a personal appearance, they would make the personal appearance at the Roxy. Whatever was current performed at the Roxy. At one point, my father hired the New York Philharmonic Orchestra, which had never appeared in a movie house. And they played 5 shows a day, and they couldn't take care of the crowds. They were around the block, because he presented them for 75 cents. You could get in and hear, and they did 5 shows a day, and they loved it, and they were marvelous, and he presented them. That was a wonderful theater. The acoustics in the Roxy were among the finest acoustics of any concert hall. When they tore that, they should have had their heads examined, really, when they tore that theater down. The years at the Roxy were very wonderful, and I enjoyed all of it. I found that I became very popular because everybody wanted to get in and sit in the proper seats, you know, and it was very interesting. I had never realized my father was so well known and so famous. We were in every newspaper column, you know, Winchell and the other one, we were always in the columns. Right. We went to every nightclub. I saw Danny Kaye in his first performance. I was really privileged to go, because we went to everything in the theater, every nightclub. People would visit us, and they would come to see where was he and what was he doing and why was he here, and we would always, and I would hear, you know, what would go on and stories, and we would always come back. When we came back in '39, and when Daddy went into the Roxy, and he began to see a lot of people that he hadn't seen for a lot of years, people from Fox, from Paramount, from the William Morris office, from Variety. Variety loved my father. He was, you know, there are only 3 people who've had an issue of Variety made in their name, and my father is one of them. William Morris is one of them. I don't know who the 3rd one was. I remember whenever I would come up, because I'd have to come to my father's office to have things signed, there would always be agents or people sitting in the office, and when I'd come up, I remember certain things that they would say. One of them came up to me, and it was always the same. Do you know what a remarkable father you have? And one of them came up to me and he said, you know, AJ is to show business what sterling is to silver. I never forgot it. I thought it was a beautiful thing to say. And another one would come up to me and say, you know, your father's door is always open because he's not afraid people will find out what he is, because what he is so wonderful. I mean, you know, you don't forget things like that. And I was sort of floored because this was this old man. It was my father, and who loved to play hearts and who loved to play cards. And when we would play hearts and he had a good hand, he would get up and begin to dance around and sing. That was he would sing, and you know, you don't know what's in my hand, but oh, what I have in my. It was a lot of fun. And then I went overseas with the USO. I was over for 7 months.
What'd you do?
That was fascinating. Abe Lasfocal was the head of the USO. And of course, Abe and my father had known each other for 102 years, and they were very close. And Abe said to my father, don't worry, when I applied, I wanted to go over. I didn't care what I did, but I wanted to go over. And he said I found out later, he told my father I would not be sent into a combatant area, never forgave him. I said, what the hell right did you have to make that decision? At any rate, they had just decided that they needed a new section of the USO because there were a lot of non-combatant areas and the boys were going stark raving mad. And they had to have something for them. Now, you know, the USO shows that went out were always top stars, and they would fly in, and they would stay for a couple of days, and they would fly out, and then they would fly in. And I mean, they did a phenomenal job. But these non-combatant areas, the boys were going crazy. So they figured out they would have a thing called soldier shows. And the idea was that the special service officer would pick a play and cast it with the men, and they would start to learn their lines. And then we would fly, it was 6 women, each soldier show had 6 women in it, and the women were all actresses, and they would come in, they would direct the play, they would complete it, they would see, you know, and they would spend a week in the camp and give this kind of activity, which was a lovely thought, except that all the special service officers were basketball players, and they didn't know what to do with the play or anything that had to do with the theater. So we on our own, they had this big soldier show conference in Puerto Rico with all these special service officers, all these basketball players, and we knew we were in terrible trouble. So we went to a store and we bought one-act melodramas, which we cut into 2 acts so that we had 2 casts so we could use the most amount of boys. And then, you know, we had signs that said boo and hiss and whatever, and I played the piano, and it was just a lot of fun. And that's what we ended up doing. And we played the most unbelievable places, rocks that were just rocks, and there was no town, and they never had any place to go. You know, and jungles. We went through jungles and jungles and jungles. And that business, when I was overseas, when these boys would come up, that was very heartening, you know. It meant I realized how much a part of their lives the theaters had been. This was the only entertainment in those days. There were very few people had radios. There was certainly no television. And the theater was the whole thing. The movies were the big thing. And the movies took people out of themselves and out of their lives as they knew them, you know. And when he came back, he knew that really the big stage shows were no longer financially capable. He knew that before he left Chicago. They were already beginning to close down the theater. You know, the theaters were just becoming movie theaters because the movies had finally grown into their own. Once they did that, they didn't need the extra entertainment that the stage shows provided. And also the theaters no longer were a community center. They were out in the middle of nowhere. They had drive-ins. It was all a different cup of tea. I don't know what my father would think of these multiplex places. I think it would just, you know, I'm sure he would see the need for it and understand it. but it would be something he would never, I don't think he would have ever imagined that, because he always felt the closeness to the people was what was important. The theater, after all, theater has been around for thousands of years. People have always been entertaining other people. The one thing that has remained constant has been the human side of it. The actors, the singers, the musicians, the directors, the painters, that talent has always been there. How it was given to the people is what has changed. And the biggest change, the first really big change, were the movies. They opened the world to people that had never seen it. You know, we are so spoiled now with what's going on technically. Everything is immediate. But in those days, nothing was immediate. Everything took a long time to get to people. And people in the theater, I remember when radio first came in, and people, the vaudevillians would say, it took me 6 months on the road to reach so many people, and I can get on the radio, and in 15 minutes I can reach that many people. And then what happened? Television came along. And all these people whose acts would last for years and years had to rethink what they were producing, because 1 million people could see in a minute what it had taken them years to show. Now, how about a cup of tea and a cookie?
Certainly.
Okay.